Good morning and welcome to Rising. Thanks so much for joining us. We've got a great show planned for you today. I am joined by Marianne Williamson. Lovely to see you, as always, Marianne.
It's always lovely to see you and welcome everyone to the Robby and Marianne Brawl.
Oh, yes.
I asked Robby, I know, I asked him, how do you describe what you stand for politically? He said libertarian conservatism.
Yes.
Mine would be democratic and humanitarian values and rule of law. Those two are in
Can we
somewhat
fit
of a
that
contest.
on the placard?
What'd you say? It's a bit of a struggle in America today. So let's have at it. What's on your radar?
Happy to tell you. Well, Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, the leader of the Democratic Party within the Senate, is canceling, or at least postponing, his book tour. Apparently he wrote a new book. Who knew? It's about anti-Semitism. Schumer is, of course, Jewish. The rise of anti-Semitism is certainly a subject worth covering. Anti-Semitism is a noxious weed that must be rooted out. Now, Schumer's book tour is being delayed, he says, due to unspecified security concerns. These security concerns are leading Schumer to cancel planned promotional events in Atlanta, Washington, D.C., Baltimore, Philadelphia, California, all sorts of places. That sounds kind of serious, doesn't it? U.S. Senator has written a book about anti-Semitism. He can't promote it because of the danger. Well, that's horrifying, given the book's subject, the fact that anti-Semitism is indeed rising. Makes it sound like prominent Jews face danger for speaking out on this subject, and certainly in many cases they do. But importantly, this is not, manifestly not, what is happening here. I don't believe for 1 second that Chuck Schumer is facing serious threats to his safety, or at least more threats than usual or more threats than are typical for an important public figure. What Schumer is facing is criticism from his own supporters, his own voters, and his own party, the Democratic base, for his appallingly bad stewardship of the Democratic Party. I don't believe he's in danger. He just doesn't want to face the heat. He doesn't want to face you. If you don't believe me, take it from CNN, even the most reliable defenders of Democratic leadership priorities. They realize the fury with Schumer is real.
The backlash from the left is real. In fact, Wolf, Chuck Schumer is scheduled to do a book tour in a number of cities on a book that he has authored on anti-Semitism. He has just canceled that book tour, we are learning, because of protests that were scheduled from activist groups who wanted to go after his decision to agree and allow the government funding bill to go forward to avoid a government shutdown. They were furious at his decision to do that. It just shows you the anger on the left and the Democratic Party. Can they get it back together at this key moment when they are essentially leaderless in a lot of ways, essentially don't have a strategy on how to fight back against Trump, and have all this unrest on the Democratic base? That's going to be a big question for Schumer. But interesting that he decided to cancel this event. They're citing security concerns, but there were these large-scale protests, at least some protests scheduled outside these events.
Now, make no mistake, the Democratic Party rank and file are rightly furious with how Schumer handled the fight over the spending bill. Initially, Schumer indicated he was ready to go to war. Give the people the fight they are itching for. In response, Republicans gave every indication they would be willing to let the government shut down in that case. Heck, Elon Musk and Donald Trump are trying to shut down aspects of the government. If Schumer wants to help out, great. Schumer then realized, okay, I guess this is a bad strategy, and he did vote with other Democratic senators to approve the Republican spending bill. He blinked big time. Now, you can argue this one either way on the merits. Maybe Democrats were wise to go along with Republicans and prevent the pain of a government shutdown. Maybe they would have been better served by resisting, by listening to liberal activists and giving their people what they demand. Look, either strategy is valid, but you got to pick one. That's Schumer's problem. He flip-flopped. Either commit to doing progressive activist-style resistance or commit to being with moderates who go along with Republicans and wait to seize some opportunity, the way James Carville's been talking about. You can't do both. Now Schumer is simply afraid to face the voters. When you're canceling public events that should be friendly events because you know the people who are going to show up will be protesting you, you are losing. As the nation's Jeet Heer put it, to be clear, the security concerns are that Schumer would interact with voters. Indeed. Will Schumer pay the price for his lack of vision? Because one thing is clear with leaders like these, Democrats are never, ever going to get themselves out of this mess.
I agree with a lot of what you said. So in 1998, the Republicans lost big time in the midterms. The next day, Newt Gingrich resigned as Speaker of the House. And that's really That's what you do when you lose.
Can you imagine a leader resigning?
Pardon?
Resigning in defeat or disgrace? That's
Well,
not something
that's
that happens
exactly
anymore.
what should have happened with the
Yeah.
Democrats after this astonishing and really stunning loss that the Democrats experienced in November, losing the House, losing the Senate, losing the White House. That is actually the message that we needed to give to the country and to the Democrats particularly. I would have loved to have seen that on the part of Hakeem Jeffries. I would have loved to have seen it on the part of Senator Schumer as well. You know, I have a theory about why this is. A lot of Republicans come from the private sector, and in the private sector, you know that if things are not going well on Wednesday, you better change it or your whole thing could go down on Saturday. Democrats too often act like, well, even if we go down on Saturday, we're going to stay with the same thing on Monday. And Democratic voters obviously are extremely frustrated by this. We do need new leadership. And as a gentleman on CNN was saying, the anger is real, and your point is well taken that we better show some real change, or I don't think the American people are going to be buying it.
There's just this wait in line attitude that the
Yeah.
Democratic Party has that, well, it's their turn, so they're in charge now, despite this widespread dissatisfaction. And I don't even think the leaders think they're doing a good job, but they're like, well, what else are we going to do? It's our turn to be in charge.
Well, I think also that they're thinking strategy rather than authenticity, and that's the biggest problem. On the other hand, Robby, let's not let the Republicans off the hook here. It is outrageous that Speaker Johnson would not allow any kind of negotiation whatsoever with the Democrats in this bill. So the Democrats had a reason to be angry with the Republicans. It's just that how we respond to all that is the issue of the day for Democrats.
Do you think they should have let it shut down, the Democrats?
I would not have voted for that continuing resolution. He basically codified what Elon Musk is doing, and there's no way that a Democrat should be going along with that. On one hand, you say, well, it's a government shutdown. Well, look what Elon Musk is shutting down. It is essentially, to me, a government gutting is as important as a government shutdown.
You think, I don't think nearly enough of what Elon Musk wants
You'd like
to do
to
is
see
codify.
more gutting.
Well, that's why Thomas Massie and Rand Paul, both people of my ideological stripes, opposed the measure, because they're saying, no, what you're going to codify is the spending levels under Biden. You're
Those
going
are
to
two different
prolong
issues.
that into the future.
Those are two different issues. I'm talking about the Elon Musk issue. You're talking about the spending in general.
Yeah.
Oh, Republicans have no problem spending on what they want to spend on. It's all a ruse. We're cutting off spending, cutting down spending. If Republicans wanted to cut spending, they wouldn't be giving that, extending that tax cut to billionaires.
Well, no, we want to do both.
Wanda.
We want to cut spending and cut taxes. I'm totally fine with doing more tax cuts, not just for billionaires, but for everyone. I would cut everybody's taxes.
Well,
Marianne.
the middle class tax cuts in the Trump tax
Everyone.
cut I support that.
Yeah.
But the fact that they will not do anything to make it harder. We're talking about billionaires. We have so many billionaires, so many multi-billionaires actually in the United States at this time. We're talking about tax cuts that not only would not affect their lifestyle, it wouldn't affect their grandchildren's lifestyle. So the fact that the Republicans in Congress are so eager to make life easier for their donor base of multi-billionaires is disgusting. It is un-American. It is undemocratic.
Is it un-American to say that I think everyone, regardless of income level, should keep more of the money that they make?
When you look
I
at the
don't think that's
multi-billionaires, yes, it is, because the creed of the United States is that all men are created equal, given by God the inalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and that governments are instituted to secure those rights. When you have what we have had, which is a $50 trillion transfer of wealth over the last 50 years, demolishing the thriving middle class that used to be the crown jewel of this country, then yes,
It's not the
is
transfer of
undercutting.
wealth confiscating that money from
No.
people
I
who
know
perform well
you
and
love to
giving
use
in
that
to
one.
other
No,
people?
confiscating. No, the money that has been confiscated has not been from the rich. The money that has been confiscated has been from the middle class and the poor. There has been a theft. There has been a class war, absolutely. But it hasn't been against the rich. It's been against the poor, and the theft has been from the public
The theft
sector.
has been
and
upward,
it's now
yes,
on
toward
steroids, Robby,
as
with this
you and I
bill.
argue about all the time, I would say from younger people to older people in the forms of the entitlement system, we, the younger people, are
Don't want to
forced
pay for Social Security?
Don't want to pay for the wealthy, as you said.
Well, no, my hope is that you will get
I don't want
those
to pay
on that.
welfare.
What? What now? What? I didn't understand that last one.
I don't want to pay you're railing against this. That you said there's been an unfair transfer of wealth
Yes.
to the wealthy people.
Yes.
I would agree with that if we reframe that slightly in that yes, the our elderly, wealthy people are confiscating money from younger, poorer people in the form of entitlements.
I wouldn't call Elon Musk old. I wouldn't call Zuckerberg old. I know they might look old
they're
to
making
you.
money. If
it takes a few years to build
they're
a
achieving
billion-dollar
money
empire.
illegitimately, then I am certainly against it. If they are achieving their money through fraud or through using government favoritism, which does happen in some cases, and I'm absolutely against, then yes, I oppose that. That's
I'm
not
going to
fair.
be taking you up on that.
Yeah.
I'm going to be taking you up on that.
I want
sure
just
what's
fair
happening with the Trump
competition for everybody.
administration.
All right, next up, the U.S. is coming down hard on Iran. Could another war be breaking out? We'll discuss. Stay tuned. Iran is in America's crosshairs. President Trump's administration launched airstrikes against Yemen's Houthi rebels this weekend, killing at least 53 people, including children. Iran is the Houthis' main benefactor. The president took to Truth Social yesterday and wrote the following. Let nobody be fooled. The hundreds of attacks being made by Houthi, the sinister mobsters and thugs based in Yemen, who are hated by the Yemeni people, all emanate from and are created by Iran. Every shot fired by the Houthis will be looked upon from this point forward as being a shot fired from the weapons and leadership of Iran, and Iran will be held responsible and suffer the consequences. And those consequences will be dire. The Houthis have attacked and targeted U.S. shipping vessels in the Red Sea for the past 2 years. In June 2024, they sunk one of our ships, marking the second one overall.
The Houthis had stopped the attacks after the Israeli-Hamas ceasefire in January. With Israel cutting off humanitarian aid to Gaza, however, the Houthis said they would restart their efforts.
Per Newsweek, the commander of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps said in a statement, I warn all enemies that any threat being carried out will draw a tough, decisive, and devastating reaction. National Security Advisor Mike Waltz went on ABC this Sunday to discuss the Iran nuclear weapon issue. Here he is.
Well, what the president has has repeatedly said is that Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. All options are on the table to ensure it does not have one. And that's all aspects of Iran's program. That's the missiles, the weaponization, the enrichment. They can either hand it over and give it up in a way that is verifiable, or they can face a whole series of other consequences.
Trump had also sent a letter to Iran giving them two options: negotiate an end to their nuclear program, or the U.S. military will destroy it. In response to the situation, Iran's foreign minister wrote on X, the United States government has no authority or business dictating Iranian foreign policy. That era ended in 1979. Biden was last year bamboozled into handing over unprecedented $23 billion to a genocidal regime, more than 60,000 Palestinians killed, and the world holds America fully accountable. End support for Israeli genocide and terrorism. Stop the killing of Yemeni people. Tucker Carlson wrote on X, a bombing campaign against Iran will set off a war, and it will be America's war. Don't let the propagandists lie to you. Political commentator Mark Levin, another conservative, on the other hand, writing from a different perspective, for the apologists of the Iranian terror regime, a nuclear warhead on an intercontinental missile has the capacity to kill millions of Americans. To pretend otherwise is unconscionable and insane. President Trump is 100% right. Iran must never get a nuclear weapon. I stand with him, period. So we are entering some dangerous territory, Marianne, with tensions again escalating. The Houthi attacks had been halted during the Israel-Gaza ceasefire, which was a good thing, but now we are targeting them again. The Houthis are, I agree with Trump, as described, as a terrorist thug group that should not be targeting our ships at all. However, I want to live in the real world, a world in which the American people do not, I don't think, desire increased military conflict with Iran. And actually, this is not a left-right thing. I saw Marjorie Taylor Greene tweeting about this yesterday, saying I've not talked to a single. Let me pull up her exact tweet. She says, I have not heard a single American say they want another war in the Middle East. Not one. All I hear is them demanding America first. I don't support going to war on behalf of other countries. I support peace. It's in my job title. So there is not a firm desire, I don't think, for out-and-out war with Iran. So let's let cooler heads prevail and not have that happen. How about that?
Yes, and there are very important things to realize here. Obama, along with John Kerry helping him, had negotiated an Iran nuclear deal. In Trump's first administration, he pulled us out of it. So now it's outrageous for him saying you've got to negotiate a deal when a deal had been negotiated and all signs were that things were running smoothly. So it was Trump who took us out of that, number one. Number two, Americans are in vast denial and delusion here. Even in that quote from Marjorie Taylor Greene, Americans don't want another war in the Middle East. Hello, Americans, wake up. A war with Iran would not only be fought in the Middle East. Sure. These people can come here. We are talking about the bombing of American cities. When most people, particularly Republicans, talk about another war that they don't want, they think it's fought over there. They're thinking Afghanistan, they're thinking of Iraq. War with Iran is not, the president playing this tough guy thing with Iran, and I would agree with you on this. These people have missiles that could reach here. A war with Iran has one of the biggest armies in the world. A war with Iran would be absolutely catastrophic, not only for that part of the world, but for our country as well, and in ways that most Americans are not really registering. This cowboy act on the part of our president is superficially kind of cool.
Well,
he's cowboy and saying what we want. And as you said, at the very least, may cooler heads prevail. The problem we have is that there aren't any cooler heads in this administration. Hegseth isn't a cooler head. He's just a puppet. He's just a sycophant who's going to do whatever.
Trump is himself one of the cooler heads compared to many other people in both the Republican and Democratic parties.
Has been
Despite what he says there, there was also reporting that he has pushed, that Netanyahu is of course pushing for him to have out-and-out war with Iran. And Trump saying, I don't really know about that. I don't think so. I don't think I want to do that. Trump has good instincts. Now, he tweets aggressively. And that statement is contrary to the America First foreign policy that he ran on, that his actual conservative base wants from him, that people like Marjorie Taylor Greene and Thomas Massey and other voices of restraint, and Tucker Carlson are calling for restraint, and he should listen to them. He has listened to them in the past, and he is behind the scenes, from what I understand, not going along with what Netanyahu and people like Lindsey Graham, the hawks in the Republican Party, the hawks in the Democratic Party, they want this conflict with Iran. I agree with you that pulling out of the deal was a bad idea. I would not have done that. I was with Rand Paul, who opposed pulling out of it because we did have a deal in place. They should work at getting an even better deal in place, but they shouldn't have gotten out of it in the first place. I agree with you on that. But I'm glad Trump is the president instead of, Lindsey Graham or anyone else in the Republican Party would be more likely to have confrontation with Iran.
So let's start with what you said before. It shouldn't even be a right-left issue.
Yes.
That we don't.
And it's not a right-left issue. Look at all these very right-wing people like Tucker Carlson and Marjorie Taylor Greene.
Absolutely. The idea of war with Iran is taking us into a place which is so astonishing. And you said he just tweets, but in part of what he's talked about here, he said that if Iran does not begin negotiations, once again absurd because there were negotiations, if they do not do that, then I think he said we will get rid of them. What he's going to do, as you said, Netanyahu wants that. Netanyahu would love that. Let's go bomb the nuclear facilities in Iran. For Americans to believe that Iran would not respond in ways that would absolutely be devastating and opening a box that would be an era of warfare that is beyond what any of us can even imagine, actually, because we haven't had anything like that on our shores since the Civil War, since 9/11.
We should always keep in mind that the way, and you like myself are very feel very passionately about our founding documents and the Constitution.
Foreign entanglements. Let's stay away from foreign entanglements.
Let's stay away from foreign entanglements. And as you know, it is Congress that is supposed to declare war. A military campaign against Houthi rebels, okay, make the case for it. Say why they're attacking our ships and we should respond. That should be discussed and debated in the halls of Congress and voted on by Congress. And if Congress votes to go to war with the Houthis, then the president would carry it out. And people like Marjorie Taylor Greene could raise objections. That's how it's supposed to work. But they've just totally, completely backed off their responsibility to be determining the foreign policy of the United States and said, whatever the executive does.
Yeah. Well, two things about that.
And that is a scandal as well.
You're absolutely correct, and that began after 9/11 when that was the beginning of Congress completely abdicating its responsibility by saying to George Bush, anything that has to do with terrorism. Now,
that seems downright quaint.
Absolutely.
Now for George, I mean, George Bush said, I want you to declare war, you're going to vote on it and discuss it. That's crazy by today's standards.
The second thing we have to deal with here is the fact that the Houthis are funded by Iran. The president is right about that. The president is right that it's Iran doing all this.
Yeah.
But at the same time, dealing with Iran, you just cannot deal with Iran with this kind of cowboy mentality. And unfortunately, the Ayatollah was correct. That stopped in 1979. But the American people should realize the reason it stopped in 1979 was because that was the overthrow of the Shah, who was America's puppet, and all of that began when America decided that it had the right for regime change for the democratically elected Mossadegh in Iran, whose sin in the eyes of America at that time was that he thought that the oil in that part of the world should belong to the Iranians. So,
and what we got was even worse. We got an Islamic theocracy.
Absolutely,
so
absolutely.
Great.
But the Americans need to have some historical context, I think.
But I'm not I'm not a bleeding heart. I'm not crying over the Houthis getting. I mean, they started attacking our ships.
Yeah, we understand
They're a
that.
thug group. They abduct child soldiers in Yemen. They're, I'm not shedding any tears for them, but I want a realistic foreign policy, and if increased conflict with them means increased conflict with Iran, that is at least something we should acknowledge and discuss. It's not what I'm for, and it is Congress's responsibility, not the president, to consider.
And I think that, and it's interesting because Congress is a deliberative body. This is where you have the difference between a dictator and a deliberative process. A deliberative process, which is essential to democracy, is one in which, as you said, all of these ideas are put out there. People come to understand what is the right saying, what is the left saying, which at our best, we've both got points. And as Eisenhower said, the American mind at its best is both liberal and conservative. No president, and like you said, this has been going on for a while, no president should just say about any issue, it's going to be this way because I say so, it's going to be that way because I say so. There's a famous line, and I can't remember who said it, war is too important to be left in the hands of the generals. Although in this case, it's not even about the generals, it's about the president who himself is the commander-in-chief.
The generals should, they carry out, they plan the mission, they do the how it's actually conducted in discussion with the president. Of course, the president has the final say on how it's conducted, but the authorization to do it is debated and discussed democratically by our directly elected representatives.
We must make a stand for that.
Yes.
Robby and I agree.
We agree on that.
We hope you agree as well.
Up next, what's in a signature? Does it depend on how it is signed? We'll discuss. Stay tuned. Conservative activists have applauded Trump's efforts to expand presidential powers, and there's a lawsuit that has been drafted to force Congress to call a convention to amend the Constitution. That is according to journalist Phoebe Petrovic, who authored a new ProPublica article about this. She writes that over a dozen state attorneys general and Republican-controlled state legislatures have been given a copy of the draft lawsuit.
And while the authors say the suit would address the national debt, opponents fear it could be a backdoor to help President Trump further expand his presidential power. ProPublica discovered that the Federal Fiscal Sustainability Foundation, funded by budget advocates and the conservative group American Legislative Exchange Council, drafted the suit. It has gotten buy-in from Utah, South Carolina, Arizona, Texas, to name a few states.
While the effort to make the changes to the Constitution are not new, Petrovic argues it now carries new weight. Joining us to elaborate is Phoebe Petrovic herself. She is an investigative reporter at Wisconsin Watch and a senior fellow at ProPublica. Welcome to Rising.
Thank you so much for having me.
Perhaps you can, go over how this works. I think some people watching may be confused. A constitutional convention is something in our founding documents that can be held to amend the Constitution if, 2/3 of the states sign on to this effort. So where does the lawsuit come in? Because you can't, if the states decide they want to vote for this, then they can do that. What is the legal challenge aspect of it?
Yeah, so over the years, there's been a number of different campaigns trying to get 2/3 of states to sign on and say they want to hold a convention. And the one that's the closest is for a balanced budget amendment. And it's basically stalled out around 28 states for the last 10 years. In 2017, they had 28 states. They have around 28 states now. And so the lawsuit comes in arguing that actually, in a magical period between 1979 and 1998, they had 34 states. They had above that 2/3 threshold, and Congress didn't do its duty to call a convention back then, and so they have to do so now, even though since then states have rescinded and the number has gone down. And they get to that number of 2/3 of states, of 34 states, by counting balanced budget amendments and calls for a balanced budget amendment convention, and then a handful of calls for an open-ended or general convention that date back all the way to 1978. Or excuse me, the date all the way back to the 1700s, actually, 1789.
Well, you know, Phoebe, this all sounds so American and the way we do things, but there's so much behind this that looks very suspicious to me. You know, many years ago, Hillary Clinton got pilloried for talking about a vast right-wing conspiracy, but that's exactly what's happened in this country over the last few decades. I want to know more from you about the people and the organizations who actually drafted this and then handed it to the attorneys general. Can you tell us more about those foundations and those groups?
Absolutely. So relying on open records requests and scouring legislative research, interviews with people, we were able to find that the group that is publicly fronting this effort is the Federal Fiscal Sustainability Foundation. It's hard to say that acronym, so I'm not going to. I'm just going to call them the Foundation. And this is a low-profile nonprofit that is focused on federal fiscal responsibility. It is chaired by David M. Walker, who was former Comptroller General for the U.S., appointed by Bill Clinton, served under Bush as well. And he also was the co-founder of No Labels. David Walker is a big advocate for limiting the federal debt and is not a balanced budget advocate, in fact, but a fiscal responsibility advocate. Also on the board of the foundation is Ken Cuccinelli, former Attorney General of Virginia and a Trump cabinet official for some time. And the founder of this Federal Fiscal Sustainability Foundation is a longtime balanced budget activist named David Biddulph, who started openly workshopping this theory back in 2020 at an ALEC meeting that was held virtually during the pandemic. And he went on to found the organization or the foundation, but he's no longer publicly involved, and he wouldn't tell me why. No one would sort of answer that. But he sort of brought this theory in. And ALEC says that they do not support or provide material or significant support to the foundation, and it's not clear from their 990 who is giving them economic support. But what we did find through open records requests is that the CEO of ALEC, whose name is Lisa Nelson, she was facilitating meetings between the foundation, David Biddulph, David Walker, Ken Cuccinelli, and attorneys general. So this includes the senior staff of the Utah Attorney General's office back in 2023, and then also said that they were setting up interviews or setting up meetings with Ken Paxton, the Attorney General in Texas, and others.
I have, for full disclosure, spoken at ALEC events numerous times. I know the organization quite well, so viewers should take that with a grain of salt. My own neutrality in this issue, I suppose. The Constitutional Convention, however, is it not a neutral mechanism for changing aspects of our government? Theoretically, people on the progressive side could be calling for one as well. And I actually know many very, very right-wing groups. I believe the right-wing group affiliated with Phyllis Schlafly was highly opposed to having a constitutional convention, fearing that it would end up being taken over by liberals and progressives, and we would end up having the fundamental aspects of the Constitution that conservatives like being gutted. So if you think I'm wrong, feel free to disagree, but my read of the situation is that the pressing for a constitutional convention is not let alone a secret priority of the right, is not even a high priority or universal priority of the right. In fact, is very unpopular among a lot of activists. I know, but maybe you have a different view.
Well, there's a lot there that I can address. The first thing is that the Constitution or an Article 5 convention is a neutral mechanism that is laid out in our founding document. It's never been used before, and the Constitution itself provides very few details or guardrails on how it's supposed to happen. What we do know is that a former Republican Senator, Rick Santorum, who is official endorser and I believe an advisor to the Convention of States, which is one particular faction of this Article 5 movement that seeks other things. They are not related to this lawsuit. But he has said openly in a closed ALEC meeting that Republicans and rural voters, but Republicans specifically, would benefit from an Article 5 convention because he and others believe that it would be one state, one vote. And the majority of states have Republican-controlled legislatures. And so a state like Wyoming with a small population would have the same amount of representation as a state like California or New York. And so it's a neutral, the mechanism itself is just a mechanism that's laid out in the Constitution. It's the context in which it's applied, and the forces that are exerted on that that make it, play out in different ways. And a big part of this is we just don't know. We haven't had an Article 5 convention under the Constitution. All 27 amendments to the Constitution have been passed through this alternate route, which is that the Congress passes an amendment first and then sends it to the states. Now, I talked to a progressive activist. His name is Sam Fieldman. He's quoted in the piece. He's with Wolfpack, which is a campaign finance reform organization. And, his take and the take of others is that this is a mechanism to fight back against federal power because the states are allowed to propose and draft amendments under the Article 5 umbrella. I will note that the piece is very clear not to categorize this as a right-wing or left-wing or conservative movement. Instead, we just expose the affiliations. And, it's notable that they have taken where we're able to document them taking this lawsuit. They're taking it to Republicans, Attorney General, and Republican-controlled state legislatures. But that's all we're saying about this. You're right. There are left-wing proponents and left-wing opponents. There are right-wing proponents and right-wing proponents. So we quote in the piece a woman from Utah who was very concerned about it. John Birch Society, who's a right-wing group, is concerned about a convention. So it's sort of all over the map. The reason that we're telling the story now is because we have obtained the exclusive exclusive draft of the lawsuit that's been shopped around, hinted at in public for 3 years, but we have the most details on this effort. And the ground game has changed given what's happening with the Trump administration at this time, which made activists and scholars that I've been speaking to concerned about the timing.
Phoebe, thank you so much for joining Rising to discuss.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Next up, are Biden's pardons actually null and void? That's what Trump thinks. We'll discuss. Stay tuned. Pardon me, President Trump made a bold claim yesterday about former President Biden's pardons. He took to Truth Social, writing the following: "The pardons that Sleepy Joe Biden gave to the Unselect Committee of political thugs and many others are hereby declared void, vacant, and of no further force or effect because of the fact they were done by autopen." In other words, Joe Biden did not sign them, but more importantly, he did not know anything about them. Therefore, those on the Unselect Committee who destroyed and deleted all evidence obtained during their 2-year witch hunt of me and many other innocent people should fully understand that they are subject to investigation at the highest level. The House Select Committee investigated the January 6 attacks on the Capitol.
Former Republican Congressman Adam Kinzinger, who was on that committee, responded to Trump. Here he is.
So I just saw that Trump is threatening the January 6th committee again. Listen, this dude knows that this is the thing that embarrasses him. He won't admit it embarrasses him because he's trying to pretend like he didn't do anything. He's obsessed. He's more obsessed with me and Liz Cheney than his frickin' golf score. Hey, Trump, bring it on, dude. You weak, whiny, tiny man who, by the way, I saw a picture of you this weekend. You're hiking up your pants now to really just below your man boobs, and you're sweating so much. Looking pretty bad there. But bring it, man. Like, stop with all the big mouth talking stuff. You're a grown man. You don't talk like one, but you're a grown man. Come on, dude. Bring it.
White House press secretary seemed to take a softer stance than her boss. Here she is.
The president was begging the question that I think a lot of journalists in this room should be asking about whether or not the former president of the United States, who I think we can all finally agree was cognitively impaired. I know it took people some time to finally admit that, but we all know that to be true, as evidenced by his disastrous debate performance against President Trump during the campaign. I digress on that. But the president was raising the point that did the president even know about these pardons? Was his legal signature used without his consent or knowledge?
It all started when the Heritage Foundation analyzed some of Biden's pardons from January 19, 2025. They concluded the ones they analyzed all had the exact same signature. Moreover, Levitt also mentioned a report from the New York Post. That report was written by Stephen Nelson, entitled "Biden Sources Suspect Key Aide May Have Abused Autopen as Trump's Far More Restrictive Signing Rules Revealed." Nelson writes, one Biden White House source told the Post they suspect that a key aide to the then president may have made unilateral determinations on what to auto-sign. I feared no one as much as I feared that staffer. To me, that staffer basically was the president, the person said. No one ever questioned the staffer, period.
Other former staffers, however, told the Post that they found the allegations absurd.
Multiple legal analysts told Axios that other presidents have also issued pardons with an autopen. Attorney Alan Dershowitz, however, says the Constitution strongly suggests the president must pick up an actual pen.
Georgetown law professor Josh Chavis wrote on Blue Sky, "If the president can't constitutionally sign something with an autopen because autopens didn't exist in the 18th century, then of course he can't constitutionally sign a bill with a Sharpie either."
I would prefer he use, I think, a pen with a quill and ink. That's how it should be. Mark Mitchell of Rasmussen Polling wrote on X, spitballing, Trump probably wouldn't have brought up the autopen pardons unless they had a smoking gun. Look, I don't think it's not the actual autopen that is the issue. I think these orders are perfectly legal and valid despite being signed that way. The broader issue is whether Biden was even aware of what he was signing, giving his larger cognitive issues being taken advantage by the people around him, including his family members who he got pardons for. You know, we all know the mental state of the president in the last however many months of his presidency is appalling and concerning. The American people view that way. The Democratic actual voters view that. And I know you were worried about that as well, Marianne. So it's not actually that he used an autopen. It's that, was he even aware of what he was signing and who he was pardoning?
Well,
that's the question on people's minds.
Then we need to ask him. Even
Yes.
in something that you just said, this assumption that he was against those pardons is absolutely invalid.
I didn't say that he was against it. I don't know that he even knew what was going on.
Well, look, he may.
I lack confidence that he knew what was going on. Let me
Well,
put
we
it
need
that
to
way.
ask him.
Yes.
It's not like he's dead. We need to ask him. That's all. And I have to tell you something. When you talk about the cognitive conditions of the decline of Biden, which I see as a valid issue, I question the cognitive abilities of this president. I mean, some of the things that he says seem so off the wall. It's not just a matter of cognitive decline. There are other cognitive issues that make you wonder about the serious and
I think he knows
sober
what room
decision
he is in at all times,
Pardon?
unlike Joe Biden.
There's more than, sometimes I wonder what country this president thinks he's in and what world this president thinks he's in. When you talk about
Those
what
are
we were discussing
ideological disagreements.
Pardon?
Those are ideological disagreements.
They are ideological disagreements, but his ideological statements emerge from the way he's thinking through an issue. The point is, let's ask Biden whether or not he supported those pardons. That's what we can do. It should be simple enough to do. And also, don't you wonder who that staffer was that they were referring to?
Yeah, it sounds like he had a little Grimo Wormtongue situation
Just
going on.
on
I
the
don't
level
know
of
about
gossip,
your-
like, ooh, I wonder who that was.
Yeah.
I mean, Ron Klain wasn't there anymore. Who was it? I don't know who it was.
I think if they're signed, it's done. You know, the president's pardon power is pretty vast, and I've defended that in the past because I think that it's important for the president to have this power because there are people that, like Edward Snowden, Chelsea Manning, Ross Ulbricht, Julian Assange, people who are too controversial to have ever gotten justice through the through the system,
I agree
and
with
you need someone who can actually do that on the way out, like the president, to pardon those people. So I don't want to change the pardon power. However, it was totally unprecedented, as we're talking about all the unprecedented things from the liberal perspective that Donald Trump is doing. It was totally unprecedented for Joe Biden to offer preemptive pardons of family members and people who were not actually even accused of crimes at that point, taking off the table any potential investigation of Dr. Fauci for the funding of dangerous research in the first place was, I think, just absolutely appalling. That's the one I care about the most. And then, the Hunter Biden issue felt, while it is not the most serious issue in terms of our own national security, the Fauci stuff is very serious. It was still, I think it was a moral abuse of power that he is responsible for, and he has to own that.
So,
was that this aide? Was that Jill Biden? Was that Hunter Biden himself? It was his family urging him to stay in the race.
yes, but that's different than whether or not his family was urging him to make those pardons. Yeah. For all we know, they came straight from Biden, and I think you and I agree that an autopen is still a presidential signature. You and I also agree that the pardon system should be kept in place. I think that we should not forget that the president's pardoning all of the January 6th rioters, including those who had beaten up police and had been violent, is certainly, to me, far more egregious than the president pardoning the January 6th investigators. So, we'll see.
Didn't Biden pardon a whole list of
violent offenders? No.
I believe there were blanket. There are people who had been released during COVID. Because during COVID, they wanted to release a lot of prisoners because the prisons were unsafe because of COVID, and there were a variety of prisoners who were released, but they were supposed to go. They were going to go back to prison once the pandemic was over. Some of them very serious, not violent criminals, but very serious criminal matters, and those Biden's order kept all those people are not going back to prison, including someone because I did a radar on this, and forgive me if I'm not recalling the exact details, a very notorious a judge, the Kids for Cash guy. Do you know about this?
Yeah.
In Pennsylvania, Josh Shapiro was outraged about this. He was released during the COVID
was he,
policy,
by the way?
and he got a commutation or whatever it is from Biden that he doesn't have to go back to prison. He sent kids to jail for money.
I agree with that. You and I are in total agreement.
Yeah.
Did anyone ever give any indication why that man's sentence was commuted?
Well, no, so it was because he was released under his sentence was not initially commuted. He was serving it under house arrest or something instead of in prison because of COVID.
Right.
And then Biden's orders
Was
my recollection. People can correct me in the comment. My recollection is his final auto-penned orders. Have all those people do not have to go back to prison. It's sort of be a compassionate type thing. And compassion is good for people who deserve compassion. This guy did not deserve compassion.
I agree with that.
And, Biden could have gone through and said, who are all these people who are released? Oh, yeah, this person should stay commuted. This person, not this person. And so, when people criticize Donald Trump, I think validly for not being more precise about which January 6th people got commutations, Biden wasn't precise either. And is that ideological, as it was in the case of Trump, or is that his mental state?
Okay. All right. We're both skeptical in good ways, ladies and gentlemen. I'll always be skeptical of those guys in that house, whether they're on the right or the left. They work for you and not the other way around.
Up next, Trump has revoked Secret Service protection for Hunter Biden. More on this subject. Stay tuned. President Trump is stripping more individuals of Secret Service protection. His latest targets are Hunter and Ashley Biden. Trump posted on Truth Social yesterday, Hunter Biden has had Secret Service protection for an extended period of time, all paid for by the United States taxpayer. There are as many as 18 people on this detail, which is ridiculous. He is currently vacationing in, of all places, South Africa, where the human rights of people has been strenuously questioned. Please be advised that effective immediately, Hunter Biden will no longer receive Secret Service protection. Likewise, Ashley Biden, who has 13 agents, will be taken off the list. Spokesman for the Secret Service said that the agency would comply with this directive as soon as possible.
Trump has revoked security details for former National Security Advisor John Bolton, former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, and Dr. Anthony Fauci, and others. Trump also said in February that he was revoking former President Biden's security clearance, along with others in his administration.
Hunter Biden recently told a judge that he could not continue a lawsuit against a former Trump administration staffer because he couldn't afford it. The judge granted his bid last week.
Journalist and lawyer Seth Abramson wrote on Blue Sky, Donald Trump has ended USSS protection for both Hunter Biden and Ashley Biden. Another clear signal that he himself never intends to be an ex-president, nor see his family be the family of an ex-president. The number of such signals is growing exponentially by the week.
Okay, New York Post columnist Miranda Devine wrote in part on X, but bet there are a lot of happy Secret Service agents today. Marianne, Niall and I have discussed this a couple times, and look, on one hand, I don't want, if the Secret Service protection is being withdrawn on a political basis, I think that is bad. I think we should obviously offer protection to public officials, that it is bad when violence occurs to public officials. That is obviously something to guard against. We clearly have needed more Secret Service protection or more competence from the Secret Service when it comes to Trump himself, given he was the subject of a very real assassination attempt that, almost succeeded or failed to succeed by mere millimeters, and someone did die and other people were wounded. So but that's a long way of saying, I don't know that there's, however many agents that were on Hunter and Ashley Biden, that is a lot of people. That costs a lot of money. What is the practice, or who is deciding how many people and how many agents and how much it goes on? Your whole family, cousins as well, all of these officials, Fauci, all of the, that's a lot of people that might be straining this organization that needs to concentrate on real and credible threats to the president and maybe others, but it seems like a lot of people were getting Secret Service protection. Maybe the agency's just spread too thin. So I don't, my gut reaction to this is not, oh, how dare they do that, how improper. I don't know about you.
Well, first of all, when you see something like 18 agents around Hunter Biden, I think most Americans would ask, isn't that a little excessive? But the point it has, for me, has to do with those political figures, Mike Pompeo, Fauci, and so forth. Let's remember, Donald Trump himself is the one responsible for the violence in the air, the emotional and psychological violence against his opponents. Because he talks about, hear me out here, the way he talks about his political opponents. You can talk about Reagan, you can talk about George Bush. None of them talked about their political opponents like they were bad people, like they were actual enemies. And the president has actually talked about these people in such a way as to make it more likely that people who are perhaps not that mentally imbalanced would think that it was their job, in order to be loyal to the president, to take some action. So absolutely, I do not support.
He's the one who has faced political violence.
He's the one who has actually faced violence.
If political rhetoric, I strongly disagree that it is so obvious that I agree that obviously Trump's political rhetoric is more heated and outside the norm for recent politicians. That connects to real world violence is something I hear a lot from progressives that I'm deeply skeptical of, because I don't see those connections very often. He is himself a figure who has attracted more violence than your average person.
The reason we have not seen, we
don't have a lot of political violence in this country. Go ahead,
but the reason we don't have the political violence is because these security measures make it preventable. That's why security protection for these ex-political figures is so important, particularly someone like a Mark Milley, particularly someone like a Mike Pompeo. We should not be taking any kind of protection away from such people, and particularly at a time like this. I think, this.
But hold on a second. But Pompeo, in the Pompeo circumstance, the reason he would need protection would be from Iran, not because of there's political rhetoric out there.
You're absolutely correct. Yeah. I was not saying that actually, but I'm saying that in such an immoderate moment in this country and in the world, we should not take lightly the idea of the necessity for security protection for ex-political people who have been in political power. And this is you're not going to like this, but this is a common way that authoritarian figures start quieting their enemies, start quieting people. If you take security protection away from people who have have strong opinions that are in opposition to you, this is a way of quieting the opposition. And this is something that authoritarians are known for throughout the world, and that's just fact.
I mean, again, Trump's rhetoric, I mean, it's his speech. It's his right. He has a free speech right to characterize things the way he characterizes them. No one is responsible. No one who commits violence can say that person is responsible for the violence, are they not? You can't.
No, I agree with you. The accountability,
else.
of course, the ultimate accountability lies with anybody.
I mean, there was someone. The baseball game shooter was a Bernie Sanders, supporter, and I thought that was totally unfair to blame him for any of that. Just as it was unfair, we discussed this yesterday, to blame Sarah Palin for the Jared Loughner attack. People like to go, oh, this is why it happened. And J.D. Vance did that too, and I criticized him for it. Said that the heated rhetoric against Trump invited the kind of violence we saw when Trump was the subject of assassination. I said, no, I don't think we should go down that route.
I'm not in any way saying that the perpetrator of violence is not the one who is ultimately responsible. I am saying, however, that if you look at the history of the American presidency in the modern era, and I pointed out specifically Reagan, Bush, and so forth, there is a reason why dignified presidents speak in measured tones, because their words matter. You were acting like, oh, it's just his heated rhetoric. It's just the way he talks. When you have a president of the United States saying, for instance, that the press is the enemy of the people, when you have the president talking the way this one does, no, it's not just his manner of speech. It is a very deliberative way that he's creating division in this country and seeking to quiet his political enemies. And that's the way I see it.
But even historically, we went through a period of time, the 60s and the 70s had more political violence than we have now. There was
but
more
it wasn't coming from presidential figures themselves. Wasn't coming from
that's
Nixon.
what I was going to say.
It wasn't coming from Johnson.
But
it wasn't coming from Kennedy.
No, exactly. That's what I'm going to say. That was what I was going to say. I think if it was true that the rhetoric of the president had some bearing on how much unrest or political violence or inflammatory behavior was going on in the society, I think that would be more clearly seen, because we actually have, blessedly, thank goodness for this, less of that kind of thing now than we had in the 60s and 70s, even though we have a more inflaming president than we had back then. So I'm saying there's not a connection.
No, hold on. That goes back to the beginning of the conversation. If you look at the Kennedy assassination today, he was in an open car.
Yeah.
You would never have the lack of security today that you had then, because we learned those things. Right. That's the point here. The point is that
he wasn't killed because of rhetoric. He was killed because there was a insane Cuban-supporting communist person who wanted to kill him.
Well, we'll know more about that today, won't we? Theoretically, after those classified documents.
It wasn't the anti-Kennedy rhetoric that somehow manifested in physical form to get him.
Wait a minute, Robby. Wait a minute. The point is he was in an open car. The point is this is why you have Secret Service protection.
Yes.
That's the point. What we're talking about here is the need for security for people who are in almost sitting ducks for certain kind of political violence in moments like this.
Well, I agree with you on that. It's certainly very important to protect our political leaders, in some cases their families.
And ex-leaders.
Yes.
But I agree with you, we don't need 18 people who are protecting.
We can't protect every single person who's ever been.
Like you said, who decided 18? Who decided 16? If that's even true, because just the fact that President Trump tweeted something does not, in my mind, mean it's necessarily true.
Well, remember when they wouldn't give RFK Jr. Secret Service protection?
Well, but that had to do with his being a candidate, and there was a legitimate argument that he was not yet at a point in his candidacy. That's what usually happens. I remember when Obama was a candidate, when he got to the point where it was obvious that there was so much excitement and so much support for his candidacy that it was reasonable. And I thought that went both ways on Kennedy's. Was he yet at a point?
All right, coming up on Rising, is the Trump administration violating a court order? More Rising right after this. The deportations continue. The latest subject was a Lebanese doctor and Brown University professor who was here on an H-1B visa. President Trump's Department of Homeland Security says that Dr. Rasha Alaweya openly admitted to supporting a leader of the terrorist organization Hezbollah. DHS says that Alaweya even attended the leader's funeral. Homeland Security said in a statement, a visa is a privilege, not a right. Glorifying and supporting terrorists who kill Americans is grounds for visa issuance to be denied. This is common sense security.
The professor's lawyer said, quote, "We're not going to stop fighting to get her back in the United States to see her patients where she should be, and we're going to try to make sure that the government follows the rule of law."
A federal judge had ordered her to stay in the country for a hearing, but then abruptly canceled it on Monday at the request of her legal team.
Meanwhile, debate is erupting over whether the Trump administration is defying court orders. The administration deported 250 alleged Tren de Aragua members to El Salvador this weekend.
President Trump invoked the Alien Enemies Act to carry out these deportations. A federal judge, however, had ordered that the planes should be turned around and for the administration to pause deportation initiatives under that act. The DOJ argued that they complied with the judge's written order since they didn't remove the 5 Venezuelans who had sued over their potential deportations. On the other hand, the DOJ also said that the judge's oral directive was not enforceable. The DOJ said that the flight had already taken off by the time the judge issued his injunction.
The district judge, James Basberg, said, "The idea that because my written order was pithier, it could be disregarded, that's one heck of a stretch, I think." The judge continued, quote, "Isn't then the better course to return the planes to the United States and figure out what to do than say, we don't care, we'll do whatever we want?"
Here's White House Deputy Chief of Staff Stephen Miller responding to whether the administration violated the order.
The President of the United States and his administration reserve all rights under the Constitution to conduct national security operations in defense of the United States. The Alien Enemies Act, which was passed into law by the founding generation of this country, men like John Adams, was written explicitly to give the president the authority to repel an alien invasion of the United States. That is not something that a district court judge has any authority whatsoever to interfere with, to enjoin, to restrict, or to restrain any way. You can read the law yourself. There's not one clause in that law that makes it subject to judicial review, let alone district court review.
The last time the Alien Enemies Act was enacted was during World War II.
Trump just called the judge a radical left lunatic in a Truth Social post on Tuesday. He said the judge should be impeached and emphasized that he was just doing what voters wanted. Founders of voting rights platform Democracy Docket, Mark Elias, wrote on Blue Sky, "Whether Judge Boasberg was correct on the law is largely irrelevant to whether the government is in contempt for willfully disobeying it. If the Trump administration knew there was an order from a federal judge and then willfully violated it, that is the end of the analysis." Meanwhile, Senator Chuck Grassley wrote on X, "Another day, another judge unilaterally deciding policy for the whole country, this time to benefit foreign gang members. If the Supreme Court or Congress doesn't fix, we're headed toward a constitutional crisis, and a Judiciary Committee take action." What do you think about this, Marianne?
What I think about this is that all Americans, no matter who we are, Venezuelan gang members out. We have no problem with that.
Yes.
The issue here is the rule of law. The issue here is due process.
And
Chuck
attending
Grassley
terrorist
is a
funerals.
U.S. Senator. He should know that the judiciary is a co-equal branch of government. You and I were talking about the incendiary talk of the president. For him to get on Twitter and X, and to say that the judge, because he disagreed with him, is a radical left lunatic and should be impeached, just shows what the president is doing here. He's trying to get the American people to withhold their allegiance to the constitutional principles, in this case, co-equal branches of government. Regardless of what Caroline Leavitt says, who obviously does not know the Constitution, yes, absolutely, a district court judge says, I want to make sure due process was shown here. And then if the White House then wants to come back, appeal that, it goes to higher judges all the way up to the Supreme Court. That's where our system, without that we do have dictatorship, without that we do have authoritarianism. So nobody here is saying let's not get rid of violent gang members. We are saying, however, that there's a very good chance that some of those people were not necessarily anything like that, and that due process must be given to everyone. Without that, American freedom is in danger.
Right. They don't have the right. I mean, they're all illegal immigrants, right? They should be.
Some might be undocumented. I don't know.
Yeah.
They
Well, they're all. I mean, we should not be deporting American citizens.
But this is disappearing people, Robby.
Well, it's removing
people
from the country who have no legal right to be here and who the government says are part of a violent criminal gang that you agree should be gone. And now that should be consistent, I agree, with due process.
Thank you.
Court orders should never be ignored.
Undocumented people also have the right to due process.
Yes.
That's what's
Well,
important.
but it's important to...
And that's all that judge was trying to say. That judge wasn't saying, bring them all back, send them back home to their apartments.
Well, I mean, he was literally saying, bring them all back.
But he said, bring them all back and let us have due process. That was all he was
I
saying.
want to do due process first so that we just have one plane flight. I actually don't like the idea of the planes taking them there. Maybe this is just me as a passenger who doesn't like when the plane has to turn around, but it has to be incredibly wasteful of our money and resources to fly them there, then have to fly them back, then have to do it again. So let's have due process. Let's figure out who these people are. Let's deport them legally through the process with particular emphasis on violent gang members and their associations. We agree on that.
Okay, and if you have to turn a plane back in order to protect constitutional principle, I as a taxpayer have no problem with that.
That's not what I was saying. I was saying, but let's do it right so that we don't have to turn it around.
Well, that's why what they're talking about today is what time did those planes take off in relation to the time at which the president said that. I mean, the judge said, we're not going to do it that way. And of course, now they're saying, well, he only said it verbally. He didn't write it, which is another absurdity that the administration is trying to come forth. And I think what the American people need to understand is, you know, Robby, all of this conversation has to do with, are we going with democratic constitutional principle or are we going with dictatorship and authoritarianism?
The American people who have voted have indicated so clearly, have spoken with such passion in both Republicans and Democrats that they think there is way too much illegal immigration, that they have a big problem with it, that is like the reason or one of the top 3 reasons Democrats have lost the faith of the American people because they didn't do enough to get violent illegal immigrants out of this country. The American people have said we want more done. So while the American people, I'm sure, want democracy and the rule of law followed, and I do as well, and I'm for that, to be clear, don't you think some people hear this and react with some frustration? We can't even put illegal gang members on a plane and send them to a country that wants to take them back without some judge saying, oh no, you didn't follow all the proper procedures, we got to do it over. Don't you think there's some frustration on the American people's part that not even this can be dealt with without a million bureaucratic hoops to jump through?
First of all, it's a falsehood to indicate that no Democratic presidents were also deporting people. Obama was called deporter-in-chief.
No, he deported tons of people.
Yeah, absolutely he did. So this is not about that. And I think a lot of this has to do with the fact that too many Americans did not study American history, American civics, and American government.
I don't think you got ahead by calling the American people uninformed.
Because, pardon?
Are you calling the American people uninformed?
I'm not calling the American people are not a monolith. I'm saying too few Americans are soberly considering the balances that we have to take into account here. I don't want violent gang members from Venezuela or Mexico or anywhere else not to be sent back. That's not the issue here. The issue is that I want due process. I want governance by law and rule of law, and that is at risk today. And the fact that an authoritarian administration might every once in a while get it right isn't the issue. The issue is overall we must stand for the rule of law.
We're not
and
disagreeing.
one of the tweets we got, I think it was Grassley or someone said the American people voted for this. The Constitution is not something that's up for a vote every 4 years. The Constitution itself is not up for a vote. And so our absolute bedrock loyalty to the principles of the Constitution must be our bottom line. We can argue within that, but we must not in any way withhold our allegiance to those constitutional principles.
I don't disagree. I think the best argument should be concentrated on, do you trust whoever it is, ICE agents or government agents, to just always get it right and to identify. No, I'm not speaking to you. I'm speaking to the American people to sell them why the due process matters, because I don't want a situation where the government is just grabbing people and saying, oh yeah, you're an illegal gang member, right, and putting them on some plane. This could happen. There's evidence this already happened to an American citizen. They didn't put him on a plane, but I saw reporting yesterday about an American citizen being grabbed by ICE and then being like, what are you doing? I'm an American citizen, and then gets released. We don't want that kind of police state mentality, because I don't have enough faith in the government to get it right. We should spend, before we move on, a little bit of time on that doctor woman who, look, she's just trying to get back into the country, and the government said, nope, you're not coming back because you went to the funeral for a terrorist. and not just as like an onlooker, but as someone who was sad about his demise. I'm okay with that.
Well, she said, because she made a comment, she said, I was mainly supportive of his religious beliefs. She did say that.
Yeah.
But once again, due process, I agree with you that I have some problems with the views of that woman and the pictures in her phone, etc. And at the same time, due process for her must, my father always said, what they can do to anyone, they can do to you. And
Due process, but, as in the case with the Columbia student, right, we're a little... Due process for American citizens, obviously due process, and due process in the standpoint of a criminal matter, even if you're not an American citizen. But in terms of your immigration status, whether you can be let back into the country is a little bit. There's not an absolute right of everyone to just be in this country. Right? They didn't, unlike the Columbia student who they arrested and put in some detention facility, and I objected to. This was just trying to get back into the country, and they said. No, they didn't arrest. They didn't. Do you know what I'm saying? It's a little different.
I do. I think what I would wish to see is more people on the right just understanding what the left is saying here, more people on the left just understanding what the right is saying here, because everybody has good points here on both sides of that one. Going back, though, when you were talking about the larger issue of the Venezuelan gangs, when Tom Homan said, we're sending them back regardless what a judge says, that if you're going to talk about impeaching someone, if you're going to talk about getting rid of someone and their political views out of power, I would say Tom Homan, for a comment like that, he has no right to override the power of a district judge.
What I worry about is the Republicans doing this. Right, you can just appeal the decision, eventually get it to the Supreme Court, where you have a conservative supermajority on the court. Sometimes I think I complain about this, Republicans being addicted to losing or doing things in such a way that it's going to not succeed just so they can complain, just so they can go, oh, look, left-wing active. Sorry, we can't give you the policy, the America First policy you want. Left-wing justices are getting in our way because we did this in such a manner that obviously they could thwart us. If we just thought about it a little harder, we could enact this policy. That they don't actually want to enact the policy. They want to complain about things not going their way.
Really?
So they find the only way to do things, despite in a paradigm where Republicans have the presidency, they have the Congress, and they have the Supreme Court. They have more power than they've ever had, and they'll still find the one way to screw this up so they can whine about it on cable news.
That's so interesting that you feel that way, because that's usually what Democrats feel. That's what we feel. Like we had the White House, we had the Senate, we had the House during the first 2 years of Biden, during the first 2 years of Obama. So why didn't we get universal health care? Why didn't we get a raised minimum wage? No Republican president would have said, "Oh, okay, the parliamentarian doesn't want me to do it." So it's interesting to hear you as a Republican, because from a Democratic or a left-wing perspective, we see, well, I look at it anyway, is that the one thing about the Republicans, they see an election, correctly so, as a mandate. They say, we got it, we're going to use our power. I believe they overreach. I believe they abuse their power. Too often, however, the Republicans the Democrats, we won, and we still won't use the power that the American people granted us, and we're paying a terrible price for that right now. I think that goes back to what you were talking about, Schumer. We were talking about Hakeem Jeffries. Would you show a little power here, guys? Would you show a little force?
I would argue Republicans winning and taking power and then using that power to actually do even some things its base wants is a very new phenomenon. We're seeing it happen for like the first time ever, but.
Well, we're still, the people who did not vote for Trump, and he did not win in a landslide. He did not. He won something like 1%. We still matter too. The fact that someone is your president from an opposing party doesn't mean you don't have any power in this country. And that's what's scary about what's going on with the Trump administration. They want to quiet the voices and quiet the power quite
Democrats
simply,
get
people who don't
pick up
agree.
4-5 seats in the House, however many it is.
Then
it'll be divided government, baby.
Josh Weil in Florida. Yes, everybody, Floridians get busy down there. You've got 2 seats that we could pick up. We've got the Wisconsin Supreme Court. And of course, what we're really worried about is the fact that Elon Musk has said that he's threatening even Republicans who will express any any disagreement with the president. And by the way, I want to say, going back to this issue of Secret Service and so forth, I heard David Hawley, the former Republican congressman, I think on Stephanie Rule, saying that a lot of times when Republican people in Congress don't go along with the president, it's always been our belief that they're just afraid because they might lose their job. Now, to me, like, hey guys, you're not the only people who have to think about ethical issues at work. But what Hawley said was a lot of these people are not just afraid for their jobs, they're afraid in some cases for their lives. He said that, and he's a former Republican congressman. This issue of violence and how important it is.
But their voters want them to go along with President Trump, so it's.
Well, that's for them to know about their constituents and their. I mean, why then? If that's the case in all instances, then why is it that the Republican National Committee has told these guys not to even have town halls? That doesn't make sense, because not all the people who have been protesting at these Republican town halls are Republicans.
Well, they represent.
Not all of them are
Not
Democrats.
everyone,
I mean,
like
many
you
of them are
said, not
Republicans.
everyone is going. But most Republicans. You're right. There's another half of the country, but most Republicans want the people they vote for to do exactly what President Trump and Elon Musk
Well,
say.
you and I have both agreed, though, it's a co-equal branch of government, and just because a president, if you're a congressman or you're a senator, just because the
No,
president
sure, I'm
said
talking
it,
about their political character. You're saying they're afraid for their lives to oppose Trump. I'm like, no, they're afraid for their jobs, and they should be, because they're people who put them in power
you believe that.
want
I've
them to
always
do what
believed
Trump
that,
wants.
But that's not what Hawley said, and I thought Hawley brought up a point that is worth repeating. It doesn't make sense that people like Marco Rubio, in going along with everything Trump is saying the opposite of things that he has said for so many
It does
years.
make sense, because the things he said and believed were not popular with the Republican base.
So he's
Things
just changed. So his
Yeah.
principles aren't what matter.
Right, no,
at
you
all.
can say he doesn't have
And
no
he works for
principles
the
and he's a
president now.
chameleon and If your criticism is he has no principles and he's an opportunist, and I wouldn't disagree with any of that, but he moved from an unpopular within the Republican coalition ideology to a more popular, and that's why he did it.
Well, I like to see people
like
in politics
you like an
standing up for their
independent streak.
principles and not just this obeisance to one man
How about this,
who's
Marianne?
acting like a dictator, acting like an authoritarian,
this,
and
Marianne?
scaring
I
the
like when-
Jesus out of the rest of us.
I like when people in politics stand up for their principles when I agree with those principles.
Yeah,
and
I
I like
noticed
when
that
they
about you.
cynically and opportunistically betray them when that is according to my principles.
Yeah.
How about that?
Yeah.
Can America
All
really
clear, everybody.
do good things and don't do bad things, and I don't care about your motivations? Can America really be healthy, however, if it's still dependent on oil? That's what one guest contends. We will debate with her. More Rising right after this.
When Donald Trump gets me inside the building I'm standing outside of right now, it won't be this way anymore. American agriculture will come roaring back, and so will American health. If you want this to happen as much as I do, please donate what you can to make America healthy again at ahanow.org.
That was HHS Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. In October, he was given a mandate to make America healthy again.
But that mandate may be impossible, while President Trump's promise to drill, baby, drill is still in play. That's according to climate journalist Emily Atkin. As Atkin points out, big ag relies on big oil, since most synthetic fertilizers and pesticides are made from fossil fuels.
What's more, organic farmers are paying the price. Joining us now to unpack all of this is Emily Atkin, author and co-founder of Heated, a weekly newsletter dedicated to analysis and original reporting on the climate crisis. Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Emily, thank you so much for being here. When Robert Kennedy said he was going to make America healthy again, as you make clear in your own Substack, Heated, how are you going to make America healthy again if you can't really help organic farmers, regenerative agriculture, getting rid of all these chemicals and our pesticides, et cetera? However, the president, having promised oil and gas, will basically do anything they want, having proven that he's making good on that promise, getting rid of pages not only in the agriculture department, but in other areas as well, as you've mentioned in your Substack, that even report on climate change. What about this inherent contradiction? Is Bobby Kennedy being kneecapped? Is all of that effort to make America healthy again, as it relates to regenerative agriculture, et cetera, just being completely stymied? Was it just a ruse? Is it a complete bait and switch? What's going on?
Yeah, I think it's really important for people to understand that if you cannot rein in pollution from the oil and gas industry, then you cannot make America healthy again. Full stop. And I think people normally think of pollution from smokestacks as being the extent of pollution from the oil and gas industry. Maybe they think of climate change as being the extent of pollution of oil and gas industry. Yes, but it's so much more than that. It's pollution from cars. It's pollution from agriculture, as you pointed out. Pesticides and synthetic fertilizers are made primarily from fossil fuels. It's petrochemicals, which are the oil and gas derived products in synthetic fertilizers and fossil fuels. It's plastics. It's microplastics. It is impossible to make America healthy again without being able to rein in big oil. And Trump said in his speech, in his victory speech after he won the election, it was a very long speech, and if you didn't listen to the whole thing, you might have missed it. He explicitly said, we're going to give Bobby Kennedy full reign to do whatever he wants on Make America Healthy Again, except for oil. You have to leave oil in my hands. And that to me just said it all. That said, okay, so we're not making America healthy again. Okay, so this was just a lie to get millions of wellness-focused, genuinely concerned, especially mothers and fathers, to get on board with this administration.
What are recommendations you would make to the Trump administration that are within their, potential to implement that would address some of your concerns about how the oil and gas industry negatively impacts people's health?
There are very few recommendations that I can directly make to an administration that has shown itself to be bought and paid for by the oil industry. At the oil industry's largest conference this week, it's known as the Coachella of the oil industry. It's called CERAWeek. The Department of Interior Secretary Doug Burgum said to the oil and gas industry, we, the federal government, view you not as adversaries, but as our customers. And there's a bunch of advice I could make to an administration acting in good faith to solve environmental problems. There were many recommendations that, I think advocates would have made to the Biden administration, which, contrary to what the Trump administration characterizes it as, was not like a huge, it was not the hugest friend to the environmental community, right? Like there were a lot of problems that environmentalists had with the Biden administration. But when you're working with a government that is so positioned in bad faith to the environmental movement and to the interests of climate concerned people who accept the reality and severity of climate change, there's not a lot of speaking to those people.
We started with talking about organic farming, regenerative agriculture, and pesticides. Then we moved, tomorrow I'm going to be talking about the gutting of the national park system. A lot of that has to do with they're wanting to use many of the public lands so that they can drill there. What about the EPA? What is happening at the EPA under the direction of Lee Zeldin? Is he basically there just to dismantle the EPA and dismantle as many environmental regulations as possible? What's your take on that?
Yeah, Lee Zeldin, I sort of see Lee Zeldin because he came in with like pretty much zero environmental regulatory experience. He was sort of a weird choice, I think, for anyone that follows environmental policy really closely, because you're like, what experience does this guy have? And I think he's sort of proven himself, in my opinion, to be like Aaron Burr, like how Alexander Hamilton describes Aaron Burr. It's like, I don't agree with Jefferson, but Jefferson has beliefs and Burr has none, right? Like Zeldin is there to be a mouthpiece for the fossil fuel industry, essentially. That's how I see it. Last week, he announced the biggest deregulatory action in EPA history, as he called it, 31 different rules, environmental rules, some bedrock environmental law that the EPA is going to roll back. This includes mercury air toxic standards, so standards that prevent fossil fuel companies and coal companies from emitting a lot of mercury into the atmosphere. This is regulations to prevent a lot of wastewater dumping from coal plants into streams and rivers. This is landmark climate change regulations to prevent power plants from spewing lots of carbon into the atmosphere, fossil fuel plants are one of the major causes of climate change, U.S. emissions for climate change in the U.S. So many, and that's honestly not even the half of it. That was just one announcement over like 3 months of deregulatory announcements from this EPA. But I think the really big thing that people need to know about is that in this announcement, Zeldin said, essentially, we are changing the mission of the EPA. The EPA, ever since it was created, the mission is to protect human health and the environment. Zeldin said in this announcement, our mission is to promote American businesses, is to create jobs. You have past EPA administrators in the news, even under Republican administrations, even under George Bush's former EPA director, Christine Todd Whitman, is on record saying, like, this is an insane thing for somebody to say, and it represents a really alarming breakdown of the U.S. environmental protection state.
Yes, thank you so much. You know, the EPA, of course, was founded by Richard Nixon, a Republican, and during those years, the issue of environmental protection was not a left-right issue. There were environmentalist Republicans, like you said, Christine Todd Whitman, who herself found some pushback that she talked about and didn't appreciate. So thank you so much for holding aloft the conversation that we need to be having in order to protect the environment and not allowing business interests to always be the bottom line. So thank you so much. Appreciate your being here, Emily.
Thank you, Marianne.
More Rising right after this. Coming Home, I'm Coming Home. That is a song being sung by the stranded astronauts who are finally returning to this planet. Suni Williams and Butch Wilmore were supposed to be in space for just a week. That turned into months and months and months, 9 of them, in fact. Luckily for them, a SpaceX capsule called Dragon picked them up, and now they're headed back to Earth. Here is footage of the SpaceX crew, 10 members entering the space station. The capsule is expected to land sometime this evening. Of course, tech titan Elon Musk owns SpaceX.
The astronauts are going to space in a Boeing Starliner. The problem was that the Starliner had issues with gas leaks and its propulsion system, so it had to return to Earth without the 2 astronauts in September.
2 other astronauts are also coming home on the SpaceX Dragon. This 4 astronauts are part of what's called the Crew 9 mission. The Crew 9 capsule launched in September, but Williams and Wilmore were already up there.
The Dragon spacecraft is currently in orbit and is gradually descending to Earth.
At around 5 p.m., the final phase, which is called re-entry, will begin. It's considered the most dangerous part of the journey since the speed at which the aircraft is traveling can cause a communication blackout and heats the craft to more than 3,500 degrees, according to CNN. Once that's out of the way, the Dragon will deploy 2 parachutes to slow it down as they descend into the ocean. Turning Point USA founder Charlie Kirk wrote on X, ignore all the noise about Elon Musk and look at what he and his team just did. While the Democrats are burning down Tesla's dealerships, SpaceX just saved these 2 astronauts who Joe Biden left stranded. And I do agree that, whatever you think of Elon Musk's impact over our politics, I know you're not a major fan. What he has achieved in the business world, particularly with SpaceX, is amazing and is a good thing. And, not only getting these astronauts back, but just the future of, I want us to be a multiplanetary species, Marianne. I want a moon colony. I want to go to Mars.
You went from interplanetary to the United States colonizing, but
well, there's nobody there to colonize, Marianne. It's not the moon. The moon inhabitants don't. It's not imperialism. There's nobody there to take it from.
I don't want our warfare mentality, not just the United States, but humanity's warfare mentality to be extended to space. But let's talk about these astronauts first of all.
And then we're going to circle back to that.
Thanks and kudos, all praise, thanks and kudos to Elon Musk on this one. But let's also remember, because there's a thing in Yiddish called Kanahora, that they're not here yet. Let's all pray that re-entry is safe. That's very dangerous. It's not happened yet, and I think at this moment, all Americans, let's just pray that re-entry is safe and that those astronauts get home safe.
Certainly. imperial warfare mindset? Well,
there's a space force now because we are taking this mentality of competition. The only way we can assume that the human race has a reasonable chance of survival for another 100 years is if we begin to change the basic paradigm from competition to collaboration. Whether it has to do with AI, whether it has to do with nuclear capacity, whether it has to do with the environment, we must shift our thinking as a human species. And so now we're even taking to space this idea what China gets, what Russia gets, what the United States gets. And it would be so beautiful for us to develop a consciousness that this is something that humanity is doing. And I know you think that that's just, oh, so cute and romantic, but I think it's the only sustainable and survivable option for the human race.
I would say that innovation requires both...
Healthy competition.
Yes, it requires both collaboration and competition.
But when they're talking about putting weapons in space, they're not coming from innovation, they're coming from competition.
Well, that shouldn't stop us from going to space. I mean, the bad thing about colonization and imperialism is that there were already people in the places that got colonized and they all got killed. There's nobody on the moon and nobody on Mars, we don't think.
Some of them we don't know.
I mean, I love Ray Bradbury as much as anyone else, but there's no one to take it from. It is undiscovered.
We don't know yet.
And that should be... We should have agreements with other countries. We should work in collaboration with them. The competition part should be, oh yeah, who can design the best and most expedient and most safe and efficient gadget to help us do that? And that's, yes, healthy competition and collaboration should be the way forward so that we do survive another 100 years, another 1,000 years, another however many
Honey, at this
years.
point, I'm worried about 50 years from now, so let's get on it.
Let's get on to Mars. That's the plan. That's my plan. That does it for us today on Rising. Please be sure to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss any content. And for those of you who like to listen while on the go or now available anywhere, you can find podcasts. Thanks so much for tuning in. Marian and I will be back tomorrow. We will see you then.
Thank you.